Fresh Air Production.
Hello and welcome back to this mini-series of Fresh Ears, where we're packaging together all the useful and insightful things we heard in Series 1. A highlights package, if you fancy calling it that. I'm Neil Cowling, the founder of Fresh Air Production, and in this episode, we're hearing how the brands we've worked with have decided on the tone of voice and, crucially, the hosts for their series. Whenever we start a branded podcast series, we weigh up whether the client wants to use an internal host. If so, they might need training. A well-known presenter, they'll be more expensive. An expert presenter, will they be credible to the listeners? The host is the embodiment of your brand in audio form, so it's a crucial decision, and one that our clients need to take very seriously. NFU Mutual began their podcast experience by knowing they needed to find a credible and knowledgeable host. The project was led by marketing campaigns consultant Charlie Greenwood.
When we had this idea of podcasts, we obviously did a bit of research. We could see that there were farming podcasts that existed. So again, that sort of supported what we thought about it being a channel that could potentially work with that farming audience. And through that, we came across Will and his Rock and Roll Farmer podcast. And then I think the choice of our presenter was going to be really important. So I think within the farming community, credibility is a really big thing. So we had to have a presenter that would have credibility with our farming audience. And we knew Will was a sort of an emerging leader, a voice within the industry. But most importantly, he was a farmer, first and foremost, who then did sort of podcasting and industry stuff on the side. And you presented us with some other options, Neil, but they seemed to be more people who first and foremost were broadcasters, and they just happened to really be operating within the farming industry. We wanted it to be the other way around, to have a farmer who had the necessary broadcast skills, would have credibility with the audience who were listening to the podcast. And then really importantly, it was somebody who could put our customers at ease, who they would be speaking to, whose story they would be talking to Will about. And Will was really able to achieve that because obviously, he could relate to the farmers on an individual basis based on his own farming experience. So I think of all the different options available, Will was a really strong choice for us.
Another brand who needed maximum credibility with the audience was AQA. The target was teachers, and just as with Will and the farmers, the perfect choice for their host was Craig Barton, a teacher himself. But there's obviously a risk here. Taking a non-presenter and turning them into a professional podcast host is not guaranteed to go right every time, and it takes careful coaching. The producer for Inside Exams was Anouszka Tate. Here she is talking to AQA's Lauren Boothman.
It sounds really simple, but talking to them beforehand and giving them permission to be themselves and to have a personality and to be human, because, the overarching view of this is that we wanted to make AQA feel more human. These are brilliant, passionate people behind all these big decisions that are being made that as a teacher might seem really far away and that you don't quite understand. But at the end of the day, it's people like you, Lauren, like your wonderful colleagues who we had on, who really care about this stuff. And that's what we wanted to come across. And I certainly felt that, a big part of my job was just sort of, even in the studio, once we got there, just having that bit of time to, get them a cup of coffee. And we had we'd always get some sweets out of the jar and have a little natter together just so that they relax a bit and give them permission to be their hilarious, geeky selves, which is what we got a lot of the time, which is brilliant.
Yeah, that's it. And you'd always find that you'd get them in the recording studio and they'd sort of look around and go, this is a bit overwhelming, isn't it? And then you sit down, you can use the headphones or you don't have to use the headphones. Oh, I don't know. What, should I use the headphones? Should I not use the headphones? Let's give it a go with the headphones. And you'd sit down and you'd always hear the first sort of couple of questions that Craig asked, which are always, obviously sort of introductory, what's your job? How does that work? And that you could just hear and see the stiffness. But within less than 5 minutes, they would be there, gesticulating everywhere, and they'd be in their element. And a lot of that was down to Craig and making them feel at ease.
Another option is to, present it yourself. Lucy Donoughue presents Happiful magazine's I Am, I Have. Her day job is Head of Partnerships at Happiful. She struck up a crucial partnership with our producer Annie Day. Here she explains how that relationship helps her to concentrate on the job in hand.
Annie's listening helps at times when I have become very focused on the person in front of me. So there was one example that I just wanted to talk about, which is Lara Podolska, who talked about ADHD, and she was talking about her experience with it, and I was really listening to how it felt for her. And Annie just asked me if it was important for her to talk about it, and it wasn't a question I'd thought about because I was so focused on her emotion in that moment. And I asked her, and she actually relayed that it was the first time she'd ever spoken about the fact that she had ADHD. Having that second pair of ears means that we can throw open a conversation that would have been much more closed because I'm so focused on that person. So Annie does everything that she just talked about, but it's also that experience of someone who has been doing it for a long time to ask the question that might not be the obvious one to me.
An internal host also brings a level of insight and in-house expertise that can't easily be replicated elsewhere. Obviously, the trick is choosing the right person and dedicating the time to train them up. Salesforce make the Trailblazing Entrepreneurs series, and they had the perfect choice in their director, Sandra Peño. Here's their senior manager of App Exchange Marketing, Tahseen, to explain why Sandra works so well.
Deciding the host for the podcast was obviously very key. So we had this vision and idea of the podcast, and we wanted someone to breathe life into it. It would have been easy for us to get an external and more experienced podcast host, but we really wanted someone who understood the ecosystem, who works with entrepreneur and founders and understood their persona. And in addition, we also wanted that person to be engaging, someone who could build rapport with guests, and that's natural and fluid. Sandra obviously fit the bill so beautifully, and for us, she was an obvious choice. However, she had never donned an interviewer hat before or had a previous experience of hosting, but she was up for a challenge and graciously accepted our offer. Obviously, Anouszka did a brilliant job in kind of coaching her. And in terms of like Sandra, now we're in season 3, but she did such a brilliant job. I think she's such a natural. She adds like her own flavor to each episode. I love the way she engages with our guests, keeps the conversation flowing, and kind of, reels in that golden nuggets of information and insights for our listeners. And she's absolutely effortless.
Then there are other times that you need what only a full-on professional host can bring. We produced The Big Steal for GML, an investigation into the crimes of Vladimir Putin. And right from the start, we all had our hearts set on a heavyweight presenter, former Newsnight host Gavin Esler. Director of Communications Jonathan Hill explains why.
He was the dream presenter. I think it goes back to there being a public interest in this story. We felt that a wider public needed to understand our story. And I think you want somebody like Gavin Esler to tell that story because of what's at stake for our democracies and our politics. There just could not be a better choice, I don't think. We saw that not only in the way that the podcast was received, because obviously he brought his experience and credibility to the podcast once it was completed and we were distributing it. So he was enormously helpful there. But also it was his credibility was so important, I think, to writing the story. Because I think, and I'm sure Martin will confirm this, when you are approaching somebody like Anne Applebaum, who is a huge authority in the field of Russia and thinking and writing about Russia, but who is also somebody who's extremely busy and constantly on the road. These people, I know from my own experience, these people are difficult to track down. I'm sure that when you say to those people, we're doing this with Gavin Esler and he'd like to talk to you, that helps enormously. And I think that's more than just a practical issue. I think there's something very important there in Gavin's ability to bring those voices on board.
The important ingredient we often need is, of course, journalism. The case files from Slater and Gordon includes many sensitive stories and interviews with their clients who are victims of crime. Journalist and newsreader Kate Jabot brings her professional skills to the podcast to hit exactly the right tone of voice, as Alison Jackson-Carter of Slater and Gordon explains.
The podcast is structured around people telling their own stories. They tell their stories in their own words, and essentially the client is at the heart of every episode. They don't want to be made to feel that details of their experience are distasteful. They are recounting an experience that happened to them and that was something that happened in their life. Essentially, we allow them to be the judges of what language and what detail they want to share to properly convey the experience that they've had. And I think, often our podcasts make for difficult listening. Our clients are talking about what is probably the worst thing that has and will ever happen to them. I'm honest, and I'll say that, we've had episodes that have made me cry. We've had episodes that have shocked me. We've had episodes that have made me feel frustrated and angry. But every episode, I also feel proud that our lawyers have been able to help in some way.
And finally, one seemingly easy win are influencers. Voices who can parachute into a podcast and bring oodles of followers and therefore listeners with them. But of course, it's not that easy. Zendium Toothpaste created 2 Minutes of Zen, short podcasts with exercises you can do while brushing your teeth. They wanted big names, fitness experts, well-known doctors, but not just anyone. People who would partner on the project, bring credibility, and prove to be a long-term voice, not just a short-term route to an audience. Pau Bartley is the Global Marketing Director at Unilever.
We need to have these pieces of content that bring us credibility out there. That says, first, you're an expert on what you talk. You also collaborate with people that know on their field, and then you engage with the audience on that particular field. I think we are here for a bit of a long-term game with this type of content. And our KPIs are always more related to, is that content engaging? Is that content building what you stand as a brand? And I think that's why internally we are, letting go of using the word influencer, and we more go with the one, Neil, you were talking initially about experts and partners for us. So instead of taking a short-term view into influencers, that you would use them for a campaign in particular, here we are with partners that we can develop a piece of content in the shape of 2 Minutes of Zen, that then we can appear in their own channels talking about the same topic, which is big enough to be constantly appearing in different spaces. We can appear in their channels. We can do a piece of communication together as well on other channels of our own, like social. And I think that builds that virtuous circle that then the brand is less intrusive as a piece of advertisement and is understood more as a brand of trust for their audience, a brand that is there because there's a common belief shared. And so, again, like in the 2 Minutes of Zen, like on all these activities, we're more thinking long-term partnerships rather than looking into the short-term return of a specific campaign.
The presenter is the sharp end of your audience interaction, and the listener's opinion of them, their expertise and what they represent is crucial to a successful piece of content, especially one as intimate as podcasting. Get it right and you're already halfway there. Get it wrong and, well, let's just say you're unlikely to feature on this episode of Fresh Ears. Of course, that's what we're here for, so if you'd like to make a super duper podcast for your brand, with the perfect tone of voice and ambassador for the business, please do talk to us. Find out more at freshairproduction.co.uk. I hope it's been useful. I'm Neil Cowling. Thank you very much for listening.
Fresh Air.